Duke Nathaniel Blackwood had no intention of falling in love with the woman he married. By the time the final guest departed from Blackwood Manor and the musicians packed away their instruments, he had already decided exactly what kind of husband he intended to be. A respectable one. A dutiful one. Nothing more. Their wedding had been magnificent by every standard London society admired. Hundreds of candles had illuminated the cathedral while aristocrats whispered about the advantageous union between House Blackwood and House Ashcroft's longtime allies. Eleanor Fairchild had looked exquisite walking down the aisle in ivory silk and antique lace, every inch the perfect Duchess. London had hoped Nathaniel would choose beautiful, graceful, impeccably mannered, the kind of bride mothers pointed toward while instructing daughters how noble women ought to behave. Nathaniel remembered almost nothing else about the ceremony. Not because he disliked Eleanor. He simply hadn't chosen her. This marriage had been arranged through careful negotiations between families eager to secure alliances and preserve influence. He respected her. He admired her composure. But affection had never entered the agreement. When he finally entered the bridal suite well after midnight, exhaustion settled heavily across his shoulders. Eleanor stood beside the fireplace with her back partially turned toward him, still dressed in her wedding gown. The room was breathtaking. White roses overflowed from crystal vases. Moonlight filtered through sheer curtains. Fresh linens scented with lavender covered the enormous bed that servants had prepared with embarrassing enthusiasm. Everything had been arranged for romance. Nathaniel loosened his cravat. I think honesty is kinder than false promises. Your Grace. You will have my respect. You will have my protection. You will have the position and dignity owed to a Duchess of Blackwood. But I do not believe either of us entered this marriage expecting a love story. No. I understand. Instead, she simply accepted his terms with the same quiet grace she had displayed throughout the wedding day. Nathaniel exhaled slowly. Then I believe we shall manage perfectly well. You should rest. For the first time that evening, he noticed that Eleanor looked pale beneath the candlelight. Exhausted. As though surviving the wedding itself had required tremendous effort. Then she offered him a small smile. I think honesty is kinder too. Behind him came the unmistakable sound of someone struggling for breath. A sharp inhale. Then another. He turned instinctively. Eleanor stood rigid near the dressing screen. Her trembling fingers reached behind her back, attempting to undo the endless row of tiny pearl buttons fastening her wedding gown. She winced. The expression crossed her face so quickly that another might have missed it. Pain. Real pain. Nathaniel hesitated. You appear uncomfortable. I'm fine. The candlelight illuminated a narrow stretch of exposed skin where the gown had shifted. He had expected softness. Unblemished perfection. Instead, he saw scars. Dozens of them. Long pale lines crossed her back like the remnants of old lightning strikes. Some had faded into thin white threads beneath porcelain skin. Others remained slightly raised. Angrier. More visible. They stretched from beneath her shoulder blades downward toward the curve of her waist. Not one. Not two. But enough to suggest repetition. Years. A silence unlike anything Nathaniel had ever experienced filled the room. Eleanor's entire body went rigid. Slowly. She pulled the loosened fabric closed. Please. The image had carved itself into his mind. He had spent years on hunting estates. He recognized injuries. Those scars had not come from a single accident. Someone had done that to her. Again. And again. Who? I don't know what you mean. It matters to me. No. It was a long time ago. It doesn't matter anymore. Please don't ask. This had not been one of them. He looked at the woman standing before him. Beautiful. Composed. Terrified. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edges of her. Very well, he said at last. Relief crossed her face so quickly it made his chest tighten. I won't ask tonight. Thank you. He intended to find out anyway. Guests lingering from the festivities offered cheerful observations about married life. Eleanor smiled at breakfast. She poured tea. She remembered the preferences of people she'd met only once. No one looking at her would have guessed what Nathaniel had seen beneath ivory silk the previous evening. No one except him. He watched carefully. The first thing he noticed was how rigidly she held herself. She never leaned back fully into her chair. Never twisted too quickly. Even reaching for the teapot appeared practiced. Controlled. As though sudden movements caused discomfort. "You slept well?" he asked. Eleanor stirred honey into her tea. "Very well." "I'm sorry to hear that." A tray dropped in the kitchen. She flinched. 2 footmen argued in the corridor. She stiffened. One afternoon, a stable hand accidentally raised his arm too. Quickly while speaking, Eleanor instinctively stepped backward. Fear flashed across her face before disappearing behind polite composure. Nathaniel noticed every instance. She never turned her back toward strangers. Never allowed servants to assist her with dressing. And, passing the library late at night, he heard something unexpected. Soft crying. He paused outside the half-open door. Inside, Eleanor sat alone beside the fire. One trembling hand pressed against her mouth. The other clutched a handkerchief. She wiped away tears before anyone could witness them. Then straightened her spine. And returned to writing thank you letters. As though nothing had happened. "I require information." Nathaniel read them alone inside his study. Lady Eleanor Fairchild's mother had died when Eleanor was 8. Her father remarried within the year. At first, society considered the arrangement fortunate. The new Lady Fairchild appeared charming, elegant, devoted. Then servants began leaving unexpectedly. A governess resigned without explanation. A nursemaid disappeared after 6 months. No one asked questions because noble families protected reputations. Even when children suffered behind closed doors. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Another report. Several servants recalled hearing shouting, objects breaking, a child crying. One maid described seeing Eleanor kneeling in corridors for hours. Another remembered the girl wearing high-necked gowns in summer. Then came the final testimony. An elderly groundskeeper, dismissed years ago, recalled finding young Eleanor locked overnight in the old storage house after dropping a porcelain figurine. The man had protested. Lady Fairchild dismissed him the following week. Nathaniel lowered the papers. His hands shook. He imagined an 8-year-old child learning that mistakes were punished with fear. A 12-year-old girl hiding bruises beneath elegant dresses. A 16-year-old debutante smiling through dinner parties while healing wounds no one bothered to notice. The scars on Eleanor's back suddenly seemed like only a fraction of the truth. And for the first time in many years, Nathaniel Blackwood felt something dangerously close to. The adjoining door connecting his chambers to Eleanor's room stood partially ajar. Another sound. A whimper. Nathaniel crossed the threshold without thinking. Moonlight illuminated the room. The bed was empty. His gaze dropped. Eleanor sat curled beside the hearth on the floor. Barefoot. Arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her entire body trembled. "No. I'm sorry. I'll do better. I'm sorry. I'll be good. Please don't lock me in there again. I'll be quiet. Please don't hurt me." Because the woman London admired as the perfect Duchess. The woman who had thanked him for honesty on their wedding night. The woman who apologized whenever she breathed too loudly. Was still trapped inside the nightmare she'd survived. And for the first time since their marriage began, Nathaniel understood that the scars hidden beneath silk and lace had never truly healed. Not on her back. And certainly not in her heart. Nathaniel remained beside Eleanor long after the nightmare loosened its grip on her. The storm continued raging beyond the windows of Blackwood Manor while rain battered the glass in. But neither of them seemed to notice it anymore. Eleanor's breathing gradually steadied. She blinked. Once. Then twice. Confusion clouded her expression before horror replaced it entirely. She looked down at herself sitting on the floor, then at Nathaniel kneeling beside her. All color drained from her face. "Oh no. Your Grace, I'm sorry." The first thing she did after waking from terror was apologize. Not ask what had happened. Not admit she was frightened. Apologize. You have nothing to apologize for. I woke you. You have nothing to apologize for. You don't understand. She lowered her gaze to the floor. I frightened you. Not because anything about the situation was amusing, but because he finally understood the cruel absurdity of what had been done to her. Someone had taught Eleanor that her suffering inconvenienced other people. Someone had convinced her that fear itself was a burden she should carry quietly. You weren't frightening, he said carefully. You were frightened. As though she had never considered it before. Nathaniel slowly rose to his feet before offering her his hand. After several hesitant seconds, she accepted it. Even that simple touch carried caution. As though she expected kindness to be temporary. As though eventually everyone withdrew it. He guided her back toward the bed. You should rest. Finally, she whispered. What? I know what people think. Or broken. Then remembered the reports spread across his desk. The little girl locked inside storage rooms. The teenager hiding beneath high collars during summer. The woman who still apologized for existing. He looked at the Duchess sitting before him, composed, intelligent, kind. Someone who remembered the names of servants' children and sent flowers to grieving widows. Someone who had survived unimaginable cruelty and still chosen gentleness. Broken? No. The word felt insulting. You survived, he said quietly. Eleanor blinked. What? I don't think weak people do that. Then tears slipped silently down her cheeks. Nathaniel stepped backward. You should sleep. I don't intend to let this go. Please. But someone did those things to you. It was a long time ago. Finally, her voice emerged barely above a whisper. When people survive something terrible, they spend years trying to convince themselves it's. If you begin digging through the ashes. Because for the first time in years. He wasn't certain whether justice and healing were the same thing. London society arrived in elegant carriages. Music drifted through the gardens. Servants hurried beneath strings of lanterns suspended between ancient oak trees. From a distance, Duke and Duchess Blackwood appeared flawless. Nathaniel watched Eleanor greet guests. She smiled. She listened. She remembered names. No one would have guessed that the woman standing beneath the lanterns still woke gasping. From nightmares several nights each week. No one except him. Then the crowd parted. Nathaniel noticed Eleanor freeze. It lasted only a heartbeat. But he saw it. A woman approached slowly through the ballroom, Lady Margaret Fairchild, Eleanor's stepmother. Elegant. Impeccably dressed. Smiling, Nathaniel felt Eleanor's fingers tighten around her champagne glass. My darling. Marriage suits you beautifully. Lady Fairchild. You may call me mother. The slight tremble in her shoulders. The instinctive lowering of her gaze. Margaret turned toward him. Your Grace. My wife didn't mention you intended to visit. Especially after all we've endured together. Every time her stepmother approached, she seemed to fold inward. Smaller. Quieter. As though 15 years vanished and the frightened child returned. Eventually, Nathaniel found Eleanor alone on the terrace. Moonlight illuminated her pale face. You should go inside. Immediately afterward, guilt flooded her expression. I'm sorry. What happened? Please. Because she still can. You're Duchess of Blackwood. She doesn't need to touch me anymore. And suddenly I'm 13 years old again. You are not 13 anymore. Tell my body that. Finally, Eleanor whispered. Because she wasn't speaking like a frightened child. She was speaking like a survivor. You've done well for yourself, Margaret remarked pleasantly. Eleanor remained silent. I sometimes wonder whether your husband knows what you were really like. He wouldn't look at you the same way. You were always dramatic. But I remember the little girl sobbing on the floor. Tell me. Does the Duke know how loudly you used to beg? Your Grace. Cold fury settled into every line of his face. I think our conversation is long overdue. And Eleanor realized with equal parts fear and disbelief. That her husband intended to stand between her and the ghosts she had spent her entire life facing alone. The silence that followed Nathaniel's interruption was suffocating. Lady Margaret Fairchild recovered first. The shock vanished from her face, replaced by a wounded expression so convincing that anyone unfamiliar with her might have believed it genuine. "Your Grace," she said softly, "I fear there has been a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" "I've done nothing except care for Eleanor after her mother's passing." Nathaniel could feel the tension radiating from her. Her shoulders had stiffened. Her fingers trembled against the folds of her skirt. The same woman who had calmly hosted London's elite only moments ago now looked as though she couldn't decide whether to flee or endure. Margaret noticed. Her smile sharpened. "You always were sensitive, Eleanor. It wasn't like that. Your father worried endlessly about your dramatic tendencies. He had spent years mastering self-control. He had negotiated land disputes without raising his voice, attended Parliament without losing his temper, buried grief and disappointment beneath discipline. But hearing Eleanor's suffering dismissed so casually ignited a fury unlike anything he had ever known. "You should stop talking," he said quietly. Margaret blinked. "Your Grace. You should stop talking. Surely we needn't create a scene. You threatened my wife inside my home." Nathaniel Blackwood never raised his voice. Margaret's composure cracked. "Your Grace. If anyone feels disgust at the scars she carries, they should direct that disgust toward the people responsible for creating them. You cannot possibly believe." Nathaniel took one measured step forward. "I know exactly what was done to her." Tears slipped silently down her cheeks. She had spent years hiding. Years believing exposure would bring humiliation. Instead, the most powerful man in the room had chosen to stand beside her. Margaret recovered quickly. Eleanor was difficult. But before he could respond, another voice emerged. "No." Yet her emerald eyes remained fixed upon the woman who had haunted her nightmares. "No," she repeated. Margaret frowned. "Eleanor. You ungrateful girl. I was 8 when my mother died. I was 8 when I learned that crying made people angry. I was 9 when I discovered mistakes earned punishment. I was 11 when I stopped asking adults for help because no one wanted to hear uncomfortable truths. You always exaggerated." "No." She did not lower her gaze. "I wasn't difficult. I was a child. And you hurt me." He crossed the distance between them before taking Eleanor's trembling hand in his. He looked toward the guests gathered around them. "The Duchess of Blackwood has nothing to be ashamed of. The shame belongs solely to those who mistook cruelty for authority." "You fool," she hissed toward Eleanor. "After everything I did for you. Leave." "I think my only regret would have been remaining silent." And for the first time since childhood, Eleanor realized the world had witnessed the truth and had not turned away. Healing never arrived as neatly as storybooks promised. Some nights Eleanor still woke gasping beneath tangled sheets. Sometimes raised voices caused her shoulders to tense instinctively. Sometimes she apologized before remembering she no longer had to. But little by little, something shifted. One evening Nathaniel found her standing before the mirror in her dressing room. Her hair had already been brushed loose. Moonlight spilled through the windows. Eleanor stared at her own reflection. She hadn't noticed him enter. "The maids are waiting," he said softly. "They can wait. I've spent years pretending these don't exist." Moonlight illuminated the familiar network of scars crossing her back. Nathaniel's chest tightened. "They used to make me feel monstrous," she whispered. He remained silent. "I thought," she laughed weakly through tears. "I thought if people saw them, they would see me differently." "Do you? I need you to understand something." His fingertips brushed lightly across one pale scar near her shoulder. Not with hesitation. Not with revulsion, but with tenderness. He leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss against the curve of her shoulder. Eleanor inhaled sharply. Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. "I hate the people who put these scars on your body. But I have never hated you. I don't look at these scars and see someone broken. I see a woman who survived everything meant to destroy her. believed she was damaged beyond repair. And for the first time since childhood, Eleanor allowed herself to cry without apologizing for it. And sometimes when frightened children arrived carrying invisible wounds behind brave smiles, she taught them something even more important, that fear wasn't weakness, that surviving wasn't shameful. That what happened to them would never determine what they deserved. One afternoon, Nathaniel stood quietly in the doorway watching Eleanor kneel beside a little girl struggling to hold a paintbrush. The child frowned in frustration. "I'm doing it wrong. There are many ways to do things," then answered softly. Later that evening, they walked through the manor gardens beneath a sky painted gold by the setting sun. Eleanor paused among the roses. "Do you remember what you said on our wedding night?" "Unfortunately, I did. You gave me more than that. I simply hope I made the road afterward a little less lonely." But they no longer represented shame. She squeezed Nathaniel's hand. And for the first time in her life, she understood that surviving what had tried to destroy her had never made her less worthy of love. It had simply proven how extraordinary her courage had always been. Sometimes the deepest scars are hidden beneath silk and lace where no one else can see them. But the right person will never ask you to hide them. They will simply remind you that those scars were never proof that you were broken. Only proof that everything meant to destroy you failed.